All right, so I'm here at Web Summit. I'm pleased to welcome Ari Helgason, originally from Iceland, I think. Now
Yes.
London-based and a young ex-entrepreneur, now VC. So just give us a short introduction that people get to know you.
So I'm originally from Iceland. I went to university in the UK, and right out of university I founded a SaaS business called Well Done a Hanger, which does sales and supply chain software for the fashion industry. So it was sort of the first generation of cloud software for that particular vertical, essentially replacing very outdated ways of doing things. So my co-founder and I bootstrapped that, first in London, then in the US, and built a very nice little business out of it. Not a sort of venture scale business, but a nice little business. Alongside that, we also launched a company called Fabrically, essentially solving another problem that we've come across in the fashion industry, which is that fashion designers have huge problems with overstock. So we wanted to turn the model on its head and essentially do a sort of Kickstarter for designers, where they could figure out demand in advance and then produce things just sort of directly on demand. That didn't work out as well. We went through Y Combinator with that, ran it for a couple of years, couldn't quite get the unit economics to work, so we went back to the SaaS business, and my co-founder is now running that. And I moved back to Europe in 2013 and got into venture with Dawn.
Yeah, so you switched sides from the good side to the dark side, if I may make this joke. How did it come? And tell us something about the fund. So it's Dawn Capital. You are very active in SaaS. You have been named the upcoming SaaS company. 8 team members, 21 investments.
Yep.
So what else should we know?
So Dawn's been around since 2007, originally set up by Håkan Overly and Norman Fiore, and they had both seen a gap in the European ecosystem for a Series A focused VC at the time. So the first fund was about $80 million, invested in some great companies, including Mimecast, which is probably the biggest SaaS business to come out of Europe in recent years, and some other great companies like iControl in the US, biggest connected home platform there, Gelato Cloud, which is a big print network. So I saw that first fund when I first met with Dawn in 2013, when I was thinking about getting into venture, and I just saw exceptional performance, very good team, very entrepreneurial team. Dawn is really run by founders, for founders, and so I really saw an opportunity to get involved in a sort of US style VC, more entrepreneurial, and so I joined at the beginning of Fund 2 in 2013.
Volume of Fund 2?
And so Fund 2 is about $120 million.
$120 million.
And we're investing SaaS and FinTech primarily. I'd say about 70% of our investments so far have been in SaaS.
Okay.
And that's given us a huge amount of experience in how to take the SaaS businesses through the different
all stages.
The sweet spot is Series A and Series B. We sort of get involved. Series A and B means a lot of different things to different people, but we like to get involved at the sort of inflection point when the business is ready to start scaling. When we're going from founders and foot soldiers to founders, 1 or 2 layers of VPs and middle management, and sort of really getting that growth and sales machine right.
Startups, SaaS startups that are coming to work with you, they could also look at Excel, they could also look at Notion. So what do they get? They will not get in the other VCs.
So without commenting too much on the others and focusing more on what we do, we're very hands-on. Right? When you get an investment from Dawn, you get the benefit of the whole team. We have quite a low deal to investor ratio, which just means that we can sort of spend quite a lot of time with them. We often co-invest with bigger funds, and in those cases, it's a case of balancing the board, getting a different perspective, and getting that sort of entrepreneurial input, which we bring to the table.
Perfect, spot on. European ecosystem. You have the American view, you have the London view. I have the German view. We hear so much about Berlin, and that is now the biggest sweet spot or hub compared to London. It's taking over. What is your view on that? And what, in your point of view, is the key problem for the next step forward for the European system, and maybe the key advantage?
So I think the key advantage, just to focus on the positives to begin with, is that we have a huge amount of brilliant tech talent across Europe. So very, very good technologists, very good engineers, and it's still possible to hire engineers, which is becoming extremely hard for kind of Series A and B stage companies, especially in Silicon Valley, but also to some extent on the East Coast, where they're just getting completely priced out of the market. And you go around San Francisco and you see these massive billboards for sort of Series A startups, and they're all just advertising to hire people. And it's becoming extremely difficult. So I'd say sort of abundance of technical talent is a huge advantage in Europe. Now, the tricky thing is in Europe is that we still haven't had a huge number of SaaS companies that have gone the whole way. So, when it comes to really the sort of hyper growth scale of scaling beyond the 10 million ARR stage to the 100 million ARR stage, that's still, the talent pool there is still challenging to find, which is why a lot of SaaS companies keep development in Europe and eventually set up sort of sales and the growth engine in the US. So I'd say that's still something we need to work on, but I'm very optimistic. I think it's just a matter of time before we get some of those exits, we get more people who've been through the whole journey and are ready to take on the next one.
Yeah, you already made a couple of issues that would be part of the next question. I saw that you have basically 3 portfolio companies that are doing SaaS that I immediately identified as, I think there are more when you do 70%, but 2 of them are in the US. So besides what you already named about the talent pool, what do you think are the major or the number one problem of European SaaS? And what is the major difference besides talent pool compared to the US?
So I'd say another difference is where we are on the adoption curve in terms of SaaS. So I think the market is in some respects more mature in the US, but Europe is catching up very quickly. And we're not seeing SaaS companies with great products. They're not having that harder time getting adoption in Europe, but that has lagged behind the US a little bit. But I think it's catching up very quickly. So I think that's a big part of it, and just sort of the overall ecosystem. But I think we're not far behind it.
Okay, perfect. So what is the SaaS topic that excites you most? Is it verticals? Is it something else? Is it still the old replacing of on-premise software?
So the replacement of on-premise software is surprisingly in its infancy. You look at the numbers, and I don't have them off the top of my head, but it's mind-blowing how small a percentage of software in the enterprise is SaaS at the moment, and how much is still on-premise. So I think we have another good 10 years of sort of just replacement sale going on there. But I think the really exciting thing that's going on now is mobile enterprise, right? So enterprise typically has always lagged sort of 3-4 years behind consumer in terms of adoption. But now we're kind of really seeing an inflection point of mobile taking over the enterprise. So one of our fastest growing portfolio companies is Showpad, which is a sort of sales enablement solution for mobile and tablet. And that's just doing incredibly well because enterprise is realizing that mobile is very powerful. People have their devices on them all the time, and they need to put some software, some productivity software.
I mean, each VC has their own metrics they want to focus on. So what are, for you, the top 3 key metrics for SaaS success you would choose when you pick a company?
So we look very much at the performance of that SaaS growth machine, right? So customer acquisition cost versus lifetime value is an important one. Sales cycles is another one that we track. And then you can look at pure momentum, right? You can just look at the speed at which they're growing. You can dig into things like sales rep productivity. That's often a very good way to understand, when we go from 2 sales reps to 10 to 50, how is that going to perform? So those are some of the things we look at, but I can't tell you that there's one metric that's sort of the key to everything. It's very much a holistic view.
I mean, you already touched this topic of that on-premise software is still predominant, let's say, in Europe. I think I know also in Germany. And this is actually one of the theses I would like to discuss with you, because there must be an explanation. So it could be simply that people are afraid, we have this data protection issue, but you could think further about that. And my thesis would be that there are a lot of horizontal SaaS solutions, but what they simply did, they copied the old system,
right,
just having it now in the cloud. So, especially when you have a look on the solutions for small, medium-sized businesses, that you, at least in the, let's say, storytelling of Salesforce, want to have as an entry point for the corporate sales later on. Why should I adopt SaaS? You know, I still have to do the same process, I still have to type it in, it's not so time-saving, just replicating. Is this the reason, or is it maybe that people just have to get more educated and it's something else?
I think what you're describing is very much the first wave of SaaS, which was very much just replicating the functionality of the systems that we had before. But I think that's no longer the case. I think now people are really beginning to think about, what's unique to SaaS. And apart from that, there's a very good economic argument. It's lower capex. It's a less chunky upfront cost, and it's to some extent lower risk. You get the benefits of continuous updates. So there are a lot of reasons to buy SaaS, apart from the functionality. There's a strong economic argument. And I think now, especially with mobile, we're getting the first wave of companies that are really beginning to rethink what's possible when you have a device in your pocket all the time. And that's a new paradigm.
And of course, we should think hard about the uniqueness of processes.
Right.
But touching on the mobile, do you see some kind of software process innovation coming in from the app? That you start with an app and then it's not only the app, but it becomes a full-scale SaaS system.
Oh yeah, and I don't think you should think of those two as being separate, right? They're just two interfaces to the same back end. So obviously the way you interface with something on a small screen is going to be different from the way you interface with it on a big screen, but fundamentally you should consider it the same system.
Second thesis, there was the Sony leak, and going through some of the emails, there was some very interesting comment about the Fed and the money supply they are doing at the moment, leading to the result that customer acquisition costs, especially let's say due to the many seed rounds that are possible today, have got way out of control, because everybody's competing for the same customers, for the early adopters. Is it something you can confirm? You find it in Europe? So companies are paying too much at the moment?
I think, there was an interesting post by Sam Altman of Y Combinator recently where he flagged up this issue of unit economics, right? What separates a sort of business that is sustainable in the long term from one that's not sustainable is favorable unit economics that will stay favorable as they scale up, right? And I think some investors everywhere have been lost touch with this idea that the unit economics need to stack up at every stage. It's fine that a company is loss-making for a long time as long as it's growing, but it needs to be growing on sensible unit economics. So I think that's really the question.
And then it doesn't matter if you paid a bit more in the beginning, because in the long run, over the lifetime value, it still pays off.
As long as it pays off in the long run. But of course it can be hard to
of course. Last thesis, what is about sales, SaaS sales? So, the story is it's only about online conversion. SaaS in Germany, I find very often doing direct sales, still thinking about channel sales. So what is the key?
I think the key is
reality.
The reality is understanding who your customer is, right? So you often come across this misconception that SaaS needs to be completely self-service. But now with enterprise SaaS, if you're selling kind of 100K a year contracts, it needs to be a hands-on sale, it needs to be outbound, it needs to be, you can't just rely on inbound, right? So I think understanding who your customer is and how they need to be sold to is what it comes down to, and then you go from there.
So there is a role for channel partners, just needs to be readjusted compared to the trends.
With channel, I think it's challenging because you don't have so much control over it, right? And channel partners still need to be managed because they still need to be given the resources to push it, but there's an added friction that you can't control the velocity. So, when talking to SaaS companies, I say by all means use these channels, but keep in mind that the only channel that you control is direct sales. And that's really where you can pull the lever and determine how fast you want to grow.
Well, unfortunately, we cannot comment on a very interesting portfolio company of yours. So we make one step forward and we just leave the SaaS world now and go into other world. A lot of people really like Iceland. You're coming from that place.
Yeah.
People there are very innovative. Besides music. So can you give us some short insights in the Icelandic ecosystem? Because I think a lot of things happened there also after the crisis.
Yeah. So one of the great sort of unforeseen benefits of the crisis was that all these, especially technical people who were all looking for high-paying jobs in banks, suddenly found themselves without the prospect of a massive paycheck from a bank and started thinking about what else they could do. And a lot of them decided to go into tech. So we have some very, very good success stories coming out of Iceland in the post-crisis years. One prominent example is Plain Vanilla Games, who created QuizUp, which was invested in by Sequoia, one of Sequoia's few sort of pure European investments. And there have been lots and lots of interesting companies coming up behind them, especially in the fintech sphere, in the enterprise software sphere. There's just a very deep pool of experienced people who've been doing this kind of stuff since the 90s, and a strong pipeline coming out of the universities of talent. So it's very exciting. People there having a very small domestic market, 320,000 people. You're not going to sell that much to that group, so you really have to think global from day one, which I think is something you see in a lot of the smaller European markets, is people are forced to go global from day one, and it just changes the ambition level in many cases. And finally, we've seen, I think, 3 new venture funds being raised in the past year, which is also very exciting because it means lots of early stage capital. You can argue whether it's too crowded, whether it's just right, but the great thing is that it just means that more companies are being funded, and we're probably going to see some great stories coming out of it.
What we see it might be bad, but for the companies it's great.
Exactly.
Any of the enterprise SaaS companies that come to your mind?
In Iceland?
Yeah.
So there's quite an interesting one called Meniga, which is a personal finance management white label solution selling to banks. And so that's kind of one of the big successes to come out on the enterprise side there. And then there are lots more coming up that are a bit less mature, but it's definitely worth looking at. Okay,
perfect. Ari, this is your chance to tell something about SaaS. You're never getting asked, but you have to tell the people if you have no idea.
I mean, I don't know if there's much more to say apart from what I've already said. But if you're building a great SaaS business in Europe, come talk to us at Dawn. We've seen a lot of them, and we can probably help you out in some way.
Okay, so it was a great pitch. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Have a great stay here at Web Summit, and I'll hope to meet you again sooner or later.
Thank you.
Bye.